First off, I would like to thank our hosts and organizers, the Philippine Atheist and Agnostic Society, for inviting not only myself, but all of the other speakers here today, and to all of you for taking the time out today to come and hear us speak. And so my topic, in keeping with the theme of the conference, Reason and Humanism, will be Catholic policies and social issues here in the Philippines. So just briefly about who I am, as I said, my pen name is Diogenes Mayberry, and I wrote the book Manifest Insanity, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Think for Myself. This is a very irreverent social commentary tracing the history of the Judeo-Christian doctrines and how they evolved over the centuries, and challenging the evangelical Christian idea that these beliefs were original to the traditions, and specifically challenging the American evangelicals who try to use the idea that the Bible is literally true and without error in their attempts to push their agenda onto American society and to American school children. And the history I'm going to be presenting today of three Catholic doctrines is the kind of history that's in the book. Quickly, I need to give you some background that is very important for understanding the context of these three Catholic doctrines, and that is that Jesus and Paul were apocalyptic doomsday preachers. Now, these quotes come from Albert Schweitzer's 1900 book, The Quest of the Historical Jesus, where he says, primarily, Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher. Now, this book fundamentally changed the course of New Testament scholarship for the last 100 years. And after all of the apostles died and the kingdom of God had not happened, had not come, the leaders of the church began to suppress that message of the apocalyptic doomsday. They started to change the message. And it's only been in the last couple hundred years that modern scholarship has begun to tease out this original message, this inconvenient truth of the imminent end of the world. So you need to keep that in mind as I go through what these Catholic doctrines are about. And just very briefly, these are just 4 examples of verses where in Paul's letters, he's very blatantly stating he thinks the end is coming to a crushing end tomorrow. So, the social issues in the Philippines. I get asked a lot, why do I care what other people believe? Why am I so vocal in my opposition to blind faith? Specifically, why would the topic of social issues in the Philippines, or the Philippines in general, have anything to do with this Canadian atheist? So for the first question of why do I care, I want to let Stephen Fry have the first word.
The Catholic Church exists to disseminate the word of the Lord is nonsense. It is the only owner of the truth for the billions that it likes to boast about, because those billions are uneducated and poor, as again it likes to boast about. But they are the ones it can tell and bully and domineer.
So that's why I like to fight. And the second question, why do I care about social issues and Catholic policies in the Philippines, is I've lived here in Asia for 12 years. I've seen the results of these Catholic doctrines. I see the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of Philippine overseas foreign workers who are forced to leave their families and go abroad and work for low pay in hard jobs to send that money back here in remittances. And my commitment is that we can make a better world and that people do not have to suffer needlessly. And also because the Philippines has played a part in my life. I was married to a Filipina. Unfortunately, we're no longer married, but that's another topic for another day. But I wanted to share this picture from a few years ago. They are from the Igorot tribe. So those of you who don't know, these are headhunters up in the mountains, the Cordillera. You can see the rice terraces in the background. So that's her brother, my wife, and her 2 sisters and parents. And every time I see this cartoon, it reminds me of her family, because it's been less than 100 years that Christian missionaries have actually been able to penetrate into these remote and isolated mountain valleys to convert them from their native ancestor worship. And so I see this, and it really makes me funny. I was chatting with Rick at dinner. I actually remembered in some of the research I did. There's a town called Sagada up in the mountains. It is the only Protestant majority town in all of the Philippines, and that's only because the Anglican missionaries got there first. And being headhunters, people say I'm the happiest headhunter they've ever seen. I'd just like to point out the spear is real, and that belonged to her grandfather. And the bolo knife was a gift to me from her father. However, I chose not to wear the traditional G-string because I don't think anybody wants to see my skinny white butt. And so moving on from that mental image you didn't want, please allow me to share with you the truth on 3 Catholic doctrines. The first being divorce, which, as I opened with, you must understand it within the context of the time it was written. Now, this verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 10 and 11, this is the verse the Catholic Church uses to tell people, especially here in the Philippines, you're not allowed to get a divorce. However, as I've highlighted in red, they conveniently ignore verse 29. They don't talk about it, even though they know full well that Paul was an apocalyptic preacher, and this verse was meant to be interpreted only in the short term. Well, obviously, Paul was wrong, because here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still talking about it. And you got to wonder how many millions of Catholics over the last 2,000 years, tens of millions, were trapped in unhappy marriages because of this unfortunate verse and the fact that it was only meant to apply for the short time. Now, this is one of the quotes from my book, and it was inspired by a situation here in the Philippines. My ex-wife's cousin was an overseas foreign worker living where we do, here in Asia, and she was going through a divorce when I was writing this section of my book. She was going through an annulment, because here in the Philippines, you're not allowed to get a divorce. So the Catholic Church just pretends that you were never married, that we're going to ignore those 5 kids. You never had sex. We're just going to give you an annulment. And to me, this strikes to me as arrogance, that this God they believe in is too stupid and blind to realize they're just playing word games. And I was just so upset because I knew the truth behind this doctrine, and seeing the expense she had to go through, the emotional turmoil she was being put through to get this annulment, and it really, really made me angry, and it inspired this quote. As with verse 29, the verse immediately preceding it, verse 28, Paul's admitting marriage is tough and hard, but the Catholic Church just likes to ignore verses 28 and 29 and stick only with verses 10 and 11. And so on to my second point. What's the point of getting married unless you're going to have kids? Now, I heard this 20 years ago from an Anglican priest, and I thought it was so funny, I never forgot it, so I thought I would share it with you guys today. No, when Pope Frank was here 5-6 months ago, as he was flying back to the Vatican, he was quoted by reporters as saying, good Catholics don't have to breed like rabbits. And of course, he got a lot of pushback for that, because you are supposed to breed like rabbits. And he backpedaled and made his speech more about, oh, well, yes, families are a gift and stuff like that. And those of you here in the Philippines, you're very, very familiar, and I was following it myself, the battle for the reproductive health bill, the organized battle that the Catholic Church fought against the RH bill for over 10 years. So now, as we go into the Catholic Church's beliefs of sex, I want to pay very close attention to the wording, because the wording that they use is very, very significant and telling about just how sexually dysfunctional these people are. Now, this is copied directly from the Vatican's website. These are excerpts dealing with birth control from the 1930 papal encyclical Casti Connubii, which means chaste wedlock. So get married, but maintain your chastity like the priest and the nuns do. Now, note the views of Pope Pius XI, which I've highlighted and read for you. This is how sex occurs to him: evil, criminal, abuse, sin, shameful, vicious, detest, horrible, crime, defile, foul stain, guilt, grave sin. Is it any wonder this church doesn't like sex when this is how they think? Moving on, in the same encyclical, if you note sections 58 and 64, he actually repeats himself. This is how women occur to him. This is how much they value women. It doesn't matter if the woman dies, as long as she fulfills her God-given role as breeding stock. And moving on to another one. It's not an emancipation for a woman to be free. It's a crime for a woman to do anything other than be a wife and mother. Is it any wonder they're so anti-woman? Now, these are the infallible words of their celibate leader. These are beliefs that all good Catholics are required to believe on pain of excommunication. Note the last one. Our inclinations are bad. They must be repressed from childhood, and we must curb our evil desires. So now I just want to share with you a clip from Penn and Teller's Bullshit.
But perhaps nothing has provoked more outrage in the international community than the Vatican's unwavering condemnation of condoms, even in the face of overpopulation and AIDS.
The idea that the Vatican stands in the way of the protection that people need is morally and ethically just profoundly wrong. My name is John O'Brien, and I'm the president of Catholics for Choice.
O'Brien's organization represents the millions of Catholics who disagree with Casti Connubii, the Vatican's rule book on contraception.
Casti Connubii they thought that if they said, you know, we've changed our minds, we got this wrong, we're going to allow contraception, they thought that Catholics would say, well, we want to change everything and anything about the church.
They don't really trust the people. That's one of the problems. I'm Robert Blair Kaiser, member of the Vatican Press Corps since 1962. They don't give the average Catholic a lot of credit for having any kind of common sense at all, or even a sense of morality.
Thousands of women who've been denied access to condoms die from AIDS and while giving birth. But as always, the Vatican would rather force-feed lethal dogma than help people live.
The bishops regard the widespread and indiscriminate promotion of condoms as an immoral and misguided weapon in our battle against HIV/AIDS.
The Vatican says that a man who has AIDS cannot use a condom, even to save the life of his wife. That's crazy. It's against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, to not use a condom.
All that suffering because of its own sick rules, and yet the Vatican says it's pro-life.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Vatican's policy on sex, contraception, has failed. Hanging on to some sort of, ego trip about, the fact that we don't want to say that we got it wrong means that many people in the world suffer and die.
It's all about power. The more well-informed the people are, the less power the Vatican will continue to have.
Less power to exclude.
The Vatican has described gay people as oriented toward an intrinsic moral evil.
Less power to silence.
The reaction about what I said was so violent. They had to show to the Italian people they were punishing me.
Less power to kill.
For a married couple to use a condom, it's not about preventing the transmission of life, which is the Vatican's obsession. It's about preventing the transmission of death.
Moving on, as the gentleman from Catholics for Choice mentioned, the Catholic Church had a choice to say, we've made a mistake, we've changed our mind, in 1968 with the encyclical Humanae Vitae, of human life. But instead, the Church doubled down. They reaffirmed Casti Connubii. And you notice in section 4, he's invoking the papal infallibility excuse. Now, at the Second Vatican Council in the 60s, Pope Paul VI could have reformed the church, could have corrected some of the mistakes from 1930. He didn't. He chose to keep the church stuck in the past. And notice the last highlighted section. Before, at the moment of or after sexual intercourse. These men are obsessed with men ejaculating. And so, in keeping with men ejaculating, I want to share with you this clip. Everybody in the West knows this. This is a very famous clip, and I thought people here in the Philippines who've maybe never seen it would really enjoy it.
My loves, blame the Catholic Church for not letting me wear one of those little rubber things. Oh, they've done some wonderful things in their time. Look at them bloody Catholics filling the bloody world up with bloody people they can't afford to bloody feed.
What are we, dear?
Protestant, and fiercely proud of it.
Well, why do they have so many children?
Because every time they have sexual intercourse, they have to have a baby.
But it's the same with us, Harry.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we've got 2 children, and we've had sexual intercourse twice.
That's not the point. We could have it any time we wanted. But I can go down the road any time I want and walk into Harry's and hold my head up high and say in a loud, steady voice, Harry, I want you to sell me a condom. In fact, today I think I'll have a French tickler, for I am a Protestant.
Well, why don't you?
But they cannot, because their church never made the great leap out of the Middle Ages and the domination of alien episcopal supremacy.
But despite the attempts of Protestants to promote the idea of sex for pleasure, children continued to multiply everywhere.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I know some of the Westerners here know that. Are there any Filipinos here who know what movie that came from? Meaning of Life, yeah. Come see me after. I'll give you a free copy of my book. Okay, this is another quote from my book. Again, also inspired by events here in the Philippines. My first trip to Cebu a few years ago, when I saw so many homeless, starving, filthy children, and I was outraged. I was literally outraged because the Catholic Church insists that all these children be born, and despite having billions of dollars, do nothing to support the consequences. And it really, really pissed me off, and it inspired this quote. However, you, the Filipino Atheist and Agnostic Society, are actually taking action to do something positive about all this. And that's your medical clinics, which I know Tess is running those. The most recent one was in September, where over 200 people received free health care and family planning advice. And so my third and final topic today is homosexuality. Now, this quote comes from the King James Version, which they use the term effeminate. Now, most people don't know, including everybody, the people who enthusiastically cite this verse in support of homosexual repression don't understand the context in which it was originally written and the term that Paul used in Greek. And the term that Paul used in Greek was katamite. Now, katamite is the male partner who takes the submissive, the feminine, the weaker, or in modern slang, the bottom. Notice there's no mention whatsoever about the man, the male partner, in the dominant, the masculine, the strong, the top position. He is good. He gets to inherit the kingdom of God. He's a man's man. There's no mention of him whatsoever. It's only the man in the weaker position that is being condemned. But notice the complete lack of condemnation for the stronger or for women There's no mention of lesbianism, because women didn't matter. They were just property back then. But notice, ladies and gentlemen, the complete and utter hypocrisy of condemning homosexuality when you understand it in its original context. And as I began, I would like to let Stephen Fry have the final word on this topic.
It's perhaps unfair of me as a gay man to moan that this enormous institution, which is the largest and most powerful church on earth, has over 1 billion, as they like to tell us, members, each one of whom is under strict instructions to believe the dogmas of the church, but may wrestle with them personally, of course. It's a little hard for me to know that I am disordered, or again, to quote Ratzinger, that I am guilty of a moral evil simply by fulfilling my sexual destiny as I see it. It's hard for me to be told that I'm evil, because I think of myself as someone who is filled with love, whose only purpose in life was to achieve love, and who feels love for so much of nature and the world and for everything else, and who, like anybody decent and of an education, realizes that in order to achieve and receive love, it's a struggle. It's not one that needs a pope to tell you how to do it. It certainly isn't one who needs a pope to tell you that you're evil. With 6% of all teenage suicides being gay teenage suicides, we certainly don't need the stigmatization, the victimization that leads to the playground bullying when people say you're a disordered, morally evil individual. That's not nice. It isn't nice. The kind of cruelty in Catholic education, the kind of let's not call it child abuse, it was child rape. The kind of child rape that went on systematically for so long. Let's imagine that we can overlook this and say it is nothing whatever to do with the structure and nature of the Catholic Church and the twisted, neurotic and hysterical way that its leaders are chosen. The celibacy, the nuns, the monks, the priesthood. This is not natural and normal, ladies and gentlemen, in 2009. It really isn't. I'm sorry. For me to be called a pervert by these extraordinarily sexually dysfunctional people, I don't think human history's ever had more.
Okay, so that brings me to the end of my talk. And so, what is the solution to these social issues in the Philippines? And that is you, the Filipino Atheist and Agnostic Society, armed with this knowledge and striving for positive change, for reason and humanism. Thank you.
Okay, but we got questions here coming from the audience. So first would be, what is the excuse of the church for Luke chapter 9, verse 27? How do they justify it? I'm not really a biblical scholar, but I don't have this memory on the top of my head. But what is the church's excuse for that verse?
What's the verse, though?
Anyone got an online Bible here or something? Wait, let me look it up.
Yes, I noticed we forgot to open it today with a prayer. Luke.
Oh, I think someone's raising his hand over there. Would you please come to the front and quote the exact verse, please? This is your opportunity to be recognized in this convention.
Okay, I don't know it verbatim, but it basically says that Jesus is talking to the apostles, and he's saying that some of them will be still alive when he comes back.
Okay.
That's basically it.
Right, okay, so that's where I was mentioning the modern scholarship for the last couple hundred years, and it mainly started in Germany. Schweitzer was a German. They began through a process called textual criticism to examine these passages, and things like the verse he just mentioned, that Jesus is saying, "Thou shalt not taste death until my Father's kingdom has come." These are the key passages that scholars know that Jesus, Paul, John the Baptist, these were apocalyptic doomsday preachers. They were preaching a message that the end times were going to come. And that's when I mentioned when the last apostle died and nothing had happened, the church leaders began to change the message. They began to suppress that message. You'll notice there's a New Testament scholar named Professor Bart Ehrman, and he talks about the progression within the Gospels from Mark to Matthew, Luke, and John. The apocalyptic message is very strong in Mark, and it begins to get toned down by the time Matthew and Luke are being written, and by the time you get to John, it's virtually gone. And he's gone in the book of John, it's I am the way and the light. It's become totally theological, and the apocalyptic message is gone.
Here's another question coming from a member of the audience. The concept of Jesus, the Catholic faith, provides hope and happiness to most impoverished Filipinos. It gives them an escape from their situation. So what concrete alternative do you offer that would appeal to the partially educated populace?
That's a good question. I got asked that a lot by my ex-wife when I was writing this book, being that she was raised in a devout Catholic family. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact it's false hope. I get that it gives hope to a lot of people who are suffering in life, but that doesn't change anything. One of my favorite quotes, and can't remember it verbatim, so I will paraphrase, is Carl Sagan's quote that I would rather live life as in reality as it really is than to persist in delusion, no matter how satisfying. I think here in the Philippines, the solution is social programs to help the poor, to get the family planning and the condoms out into these communities. That's going to do more good, more tangible good. So.
Yes, I have to agree with Jason. I mean, changing the situation or the context which allows the existence or the dominance of the Catholic Church would make a difference. So, next question, or rather last question, right? Last question. In addition to in addition to apocalypticism, do you believe that Paul could have been a closeted homosexual and that could have affected his theology? Interesting.
There is some scholarly beliefs that Paul was rather sexually dysfunctional, given the quote I showed earlier, not only about marriage, but he was basically talking about chastity in general. Now, he didn't enforce chastity on his believers. He suggested it, but he said, look, I know it's hard. Try really if you can, but if you can't, if you're married, then okay, we'll let it slide. So a lot of scholars do think that maybe not homosexual, but that he definitely had some sexual issues. So